Jason, good to talk to you again. What's
Hi,
going
Martine.
on? Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing all right, doing all right. Looking at Instagram these days, we have definitely hit peak engagement season. I'm seeing all the rings and all the proposals pop up on my timeline.
Well,
It's
first
kind
of
of
all,
funny.
Martine, first of all, Happy New Year.
Hi, thank you. I always forget that, so I don't actually celebrate. I don't celebrate any of the things.
Oh,
And so
really?
like for
Wait a
me,
minute.
but
Did I
I
know
I
that
will
about you?
I don't think you did. I don't
I
think you
don't think
did.
I knew
So
that.
so now you know. Now you know.
Okay.
So, but one of the things that I always appreciate about like end of the year is like the extreme downtime. So, I spent the last week reading a whole new book series, and it was kind of intense, but because, I'm not worried about like any of the holiday stuff. It was like probably like over 4,000 pages in like the last week of the year. But I met my book goal
Oh,
for the year. So that's how
you
I spent my
are
time.
a monster reader. You are a monster reader.
I
Well,
really wanted to get through this series. It was really important to me. How about yourself? What were you up to?
yeah, just a really low key holiday season, kind of just finishing up some edits. I actually did have a wedding on December 30th.
Gotcha.
So juggling some family time and also juggling, finishing up some edits while also getting ready for a wedding. New Year's, I'm not really a big New Year's, go out kind of person. I think I would rather either be home on my couch or in Bora Bora, but nothing in between.
I don't know that I've ever been to Bora Bora, so I cannot tell you
Well,
like
me
what that
neither.
experience.
Well, me neither. But that's my point.
No,
But
I hear you. I feel like maybe it was like a old school thing, like that you wanted to go out and party, or maybe it's like a younger people thing. I don't know. I don't know. I really can't tell. What I do know is most of the people that I know are in the same boat as you, where you're like, meh, I'm just gonna stay home, and we don't really have to do that, whole
yeah,
going out in the masses thing.
that's right. That's right. I did that a lot more when I was young. But now
You're
I'm
telling your
happy.
age there, Jason.
Yeah, I just watched the ball drop. Not even on my TV. I watched it on my phone, and then I go to sleep. And this was the first year that I did it, so I watched it, and I could tell that I was on a delay because I was on my phone, and I heard people in my neighborhood were cheering like a minute before me, and I was like, oh wait a minute, it's not really
There you go.
midnight, but it was still all right. But how are things shaping up for 24 for you? I mean,
Just trying to get my couples ready to go here. Like, there's a lot of pre-work that has to happen on my side as the planner. Just making sure that they've got things kind of ready to go. This is like it's couples who I've been working with for at least a few months. Some weddings starting to kick up, so we start back up in March for like actual wedding season. And so
okay.
this is kind of prep time, if you will. Make sure we've got all the details ironed out and everything ready to go before weddings actually hit in March. How about
Yes,
yourself?
I actually I have I think a wedding in March too. I'm not looking at my calendar, but I think that's when my first wedding is as well. So, just getting ready to start getting my couples ready for for video and some of the things they need to be thinking about and I need to be thinking about. So yeah, I mean, like you started the episode, there's this time of year, Christmas, New Year's, you see a lot of engagements online and people flashing their new rings or they're in some exotic location like Bora Bora, uh, proposing, and I'm so
Posing.
jealous. Yeah, proposing in Bora Bora. I just want to go to Bora Bora, but
I think that's what I'm hearing, Jason. I think that sounds like
yes,
the
just
next
think,
vacation might
yes,
be
maybe
planned for that.
we might have to do a podcast from Bora Bora at some point in the future.
That sounds like fun. I myself am actually going to Thailand fairly soon here, so I'm excited to get that. So maybe we do an episode from Thailand. That might be a
Oh,
thing. There you
yes,
go.
yes, I
So
would love that.
so I'm looking forward to that trip too. But yeah, I think one of the things that before I was a wedding vendor, my timeline might have popped up. I mean, I still went to an extreme number of weddings, probably for most folks, but my timeline wasn't necessarily saturated with all of the information. But right now, looking at all of it, you're like, oh, that's so cute. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's nice. And ooh, it's just a lot of fun looking at all the excitement and everybody's like joy over the engagements and the engagement piece of what they're doing. And so I just kind of have fun looking at all the things that are happening right now, getting ready for those couples to actually start the planning process.
Yeah. And so, if you're reading the title of this episode, you see that this is, we're going to be talking about some things that you should be thinking about as you approach the wedding planning, right? Because at the beginning, it's so exciting. You announce it, your fiance proposes to you, and everything is great. And you may even be excited to jump into the planning process. But where do you start, and what are some things that you should know about before you kind of dive headlong into this process? So you want to start, Martine?
Yeah, so I think that is the first conversation I have with folks when I talk to them is making sure they actually have a plan in mind, right? Because I've seen so many people go about it the wrong way. Some of that is because it's overwhelming. Some of that is because they don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know when you're getting into the wedding planning process. And so everybody's ideas sound like good ideas when you jump into it, or what you see on Pinterest or what you're seeing on Instagram, etc. What you might have seen at other people's or other friends' weddings, if that's a thing. There's so many other ways that you can go, that you can get some information. But the problem is that it's all conjecture, right? Like you don't have any actually basis in where you start. And one of the things I would love for couples to know, like love for them to know before you begin, is that you sort of need a plan, right? Before before going out there and like spending any money, you sort of have to have some idea of what you want first, and like you don't have to have all the details ironed out, but kind of the gist of what season do we want to get married in, ultimately where, like location, what kind of what would make me happiest, what would make this wedding amazing for me and my partner, just right off the bat, to know those things. And I just really feel like there's some details it would be nice for people to know beforehand. So I would love to talk about that today and just help people get off on the right foot.
It's so funny. You talk about like all of these different influences that impact people when they are thinking about planning their wedding, like what they see on Pinterest, what they see on TV, their friend's wedding, what their parents want. Have you ever heard of something called what is it called? The paradox of choice. That's what it's called.
That's
it. You know what that is?
Yes, I do.
And
yeah.
I mean, I experience it every time I go to Whole Foods. And if they're going to offer me like 9 different types of jam, I never know which one to pick. But if you offer me 3 types of jam, I can pick one very easily. And I think 100%. That's what happens with a lot of people. There's just so many influences in every different vendor category. It's overwhelming.
It is. And the overwhelm, it not only takes the fun out of the process, but it makes wedding planning so much more stressful. And so one of the things that I like to tell people is like, you got to come in with a plan and then tell people what that plan is, right? When I say that, obviously you're going to take into consideration like what your parents want and, what you guys want as a couple. But the point is that if you start off just listening to everybody else, there's so many ideas and options, it starts to get overwhelming. And then, man, I can't tell you the number of times I've had couples come to me and say, if it were left up to me, I wouldn't do this at all because it's just too much. It's too much. And we want to get the too much part out of the way for people so that just make it a little bit more seamless, going into things.
Definitely. I've heard that too from couples. And one thing that I have heard from couples a lot, as being one of the vendors that tends to be, I know you like to promote videographers a little bit earlier in the game, but I can tell you as a videographer, we are oftentimes one of the last vendors to be booked. And even at my stage, I can tell you that many couples are talking to me already about how much they spent on their venue. Now, what do you know about that?
So that's the thing. So one thing to consider is how much food actually costs. I'll give you an illustration that I like to give my couples right off the bat is if you think about how much you would spend to go out and eat with your partner, just the two of you. It's date night, we're doing something fancy, going to, doing something that we consider fun, whatever that looks like. Live music maybe. Maybe we're going out dancing, we're getting some food, we're having some drinks, and then you price that out. Like, what does that look like? From a food, beverage, entertainment perspective, and that's really what you're looking at in terms of venue when people think about it. I'm not making up a number. Maybe your perfect date night is a picnic in the park, right? Like maybe that's the case, right? But the point is, whatever that looks like for the two of you, you now have to multiply that number by however many guests you're planning on having. And so that's a big chunk of money that you're about to spend. And just contextualizing what that looks like and understanding that from a overall budget perspective, it will always be the number of people that you invite and your venue food and beverage is always going to be 50 to 60% of your budget automatically. And one of the things that I've seen happen is that people spend all of their money on the venue thinking that's where all of their expenses are really going to go. And then they don't have the facility to book the other vendors, or now we're making a lot of exceptions so that because we've already spent all of the money on the venue piece of it. So I really wish people knew that part first, to be honest with you. 50 to 60%. And food and beverage is expensive. Like, I mean, we live in New York. You ever go out drinking for a night? What does that look like? And then, if everybody wants the open bar, and I get it, right? Like that's an experience for the guests. But if you want to drinks all night, what would that look like, friend? Like it's gonna be a pretty chunk of change. So yeah,
you got to think about your audience, think about your guests, right?
Exactly.
And so speaking about thinking about guests, I know that another area that a lot of people struggle with, and I know I struggled with it too when my wife and I were getting, we were creating our guest list. It was hard to limit it. It was, and I have to tell you, we were not even limited by my family, like my mom and dad and her parents were not saying, well, you must invite this one and that one. It wasn't even the outside influences. It was literally our own pressure to want to invite friends and people who maybe were B-listers, right? And so definitely some B-listers did come, but we had to limit the B-listers, and it was hard to make cuts. Talk about that.
One of the things that I find super interesting about this topic is everybody comes at it from exactly where you did, Jason. Sometimes the parents make it worse. I'm going to be honest with you. Like parents want to invite too many people, or we're trying to impress friends or coworkers or colleagues, etc. But everybody puts the pressure on themselves because it's hard to say, well, I don't want that person there, right? Like it feels like you're being negative, and I can understand where that comes in. But here's the thing. If this person isn't a major part of your life, maybe they didn't even know you were dating. Maybe they didn't even know you were engaged. They've never hung out with the two of you as a couple. The last time you saw them was, 10 years ago. Maybe we were really good friends back in the day, or some of the other things that I see, especially with work. Like I want to invite the rest of my colleagues, but I'm not really super tight with that person, but it would be awkward to just not have this person. Here's the thing. And I think most people don't realize this. How you feel about getting a wedding invitation is often the same way that people are feeling about sending it out. In other words, I don't want to go to every wedding, Jason. Do you? Like, there's some people that I would be plenty happy to not get an invitation from them. Right?
I hope some of my friends are not listening, because there have been times where around my circles, I hear that someone's getting married, and people are kind of delicately dancing around me because they know that I wasn't invited, and they don't want to be impolite. And in my mind, I'm like, I hope I don't get the invitation.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's the thing. Like everybody's has like these interpretations or feelings that they think is what the other person is going to be thinking, and all of that politics, if you will, about the invitations. At the end of it, most people, unless they're your besties, right? There's probably only a handful of people that absolutely have to be there in order to make it, like, the people that you say, if they're not there, I might as well not have a wedding, right? Those are there are definitely those people who have to be on the list. Those are the people you're telling before you book a venue, and you make sure those people have cleared their calendars because we've got a date, and you have to be there. So we're making sure it works 100% for you. Those are the people that have to be there. Everybody else is a bonus. And I'm not saying we don't have any other bonus people. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that you don't extend the guest list to like your friends. But ultimately, I really feel like most people knew, if you really thought about it deep down inside, as much as you don't want to invite them, they probably don't want to come. But once they've received the invitation, they are now under the same obligation that you felt to send it. And so just thinking about that in a different light about what those invitations actually need to look like versus what we make them look like and the stress and the pressure that we're giving. Now, look, ultimately, sometimes it comes down to numbers. You have to limit it somewhere. There's always going to be a cutoff point. And I feel like it's so important that people realize if there is somebody for whatever reason, like I really do love them, but frankly, like I'm out, right? Like they're not quite B-list, but we just ran out of space. They missed the cut by a little bit. I do highly suggest that you go have a conversation with that person and tell them you love them, and make sure that they understand so that they're not feeling, badly about the fact that they weren't invited, even though.
Do you tell them that you were actually number 201 on my 200 person guest list?
200, and I'm so sorry, but like you really just had to. And it's not even me. It was my parents, and my parents insisted on these other people that I didn't want. But you absolutely would have been there. I think you can have the conversation. If they're a real friend, truthfully, if they're a real friend, they will understand and they will be happy for you, and they won't be offended. The people who get offended, this is the truth, the people who end up getting offended are the ones who were like nowhere near 201, right? Like they're the ones who are like way down the, like if I barely remember who you are, and they're the ones who are going to get offended and mad, and I'm never speaking to you again because you didn't invite me to your wedding. And like who cares? Like at that point I was probably never going to talk to you again anyway.
Yeah, just to throw some counterpoint in there, during our wedding, and I'm sure you've experienced this too with some of the couples you've worked with, there have been there were times, there were a few people in my wife and our lives who, as a result of not getting invited, friendships have been broken apart. And there was one situation where it was a straight up, we didn't invite you type of situation, and the person was very upset about it. And then there was another situation where we were trying to invite this person and they never returned our call, so that we couldn't get their address. And so because we couldn't get their address, we did not send one out, and the person would not return our call. And so when that person found out that we got married, they were very upset, and they refused to speak to us. So there can be sometimes some difficult things that do happen, and I think it's important to acknowledge that too. That sometimes people are very sensitive.
I get it, and I get the sensitivity in terms of, not for the people who you were intentionally not trying to invite, right? But for the people who you did want to invite, or for the people, and that's why I say you can't just ignore it, Jason. If you want to be or want to remain friends with this person, you can't just not send them an invitation and expect that the relationship is going to stay the same. It is a very important moment in your life. And I guess, just ultimately the feeling is generally like, I actually think people are better off with smaller weddings, because if no one's going, I didn't expect to be, top 25 material, right? But right. If everybody is going, and when I say everybody, if you've got 200 people, and everybody else on your friends list got an invitation, for example, and this one person didn't. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of hard to take. Like, at the very least, you're saying something in the lack of an invitation. And my point is, it requires a conversation if your plan is to maintain a relationship. Now, sometimes it might not be, right? Like sometimes it was intentional, right? Like you're not on the list and I didn't even think about, I missed your, like, I didn't get your name. I didn't get anything. Right. But if it is not in, like, if you're not intentionally attempting to skip out on somebody, then it does require follow-up conversation about why they're not invited to your wedding. 100%.
Sure. I mean, one thing to be certain, and as we move on to the next point is, approach these situations with tact and approach these situations with some maturity, because I know that a lot of times people want to just hush up and make, hopefully it goes away and people are left wondering why they are invited or why they're not invited. Why aren't I sitting here? And well, a lot of people have their own personal issues, but you can only do what you can do. But I think it's great. Like, have a conversation with someone if there's a difficult thing that's bothering you. It's probably on their mind to some extent as well.
Exactly.
But I know that you wanted to also talk about clear goals, right? And so we should have probably started with with clear goals. But
we probably should have, although it can kind of go in both directions. So one of the things that I say is when we're talking wedding planning and budgets, for example, you don't know what you don't know when you're stepping into it. And so I actually think knowing that, 50 to 60% of the budget is important because it actually is going to contextualize your goals at the end of this, right? So before you go into anything, having some semblance of what am I going to spend on it and why. Also, how many people do I want at my wedding and why, and what kind of day you would like to have with your partner. Those are what I really mean by the goals. Like, what makes this a good wedding for you? Is it the money? Is it the people? Is it the location? Is it some combination of these things? One thing that I do like people to know is that everything can't be the most important thing, right? If everything is most important, nothing is important. And so obviously, when I'm talking about goals, I just mean that you kind of need to prioritize your wish list of items, things that are most important to you to things that are optional or nice to haves, but aren't going to make or break your day if you end up missing on them. I think it's important to have those goals outlined when you go talk to family, when you talk to friends, before you start speaking to vendors, because it'll help you get to the more important things first. If this is truly the important stuff for you in terms of like what will make or break your wedding day, you should know that before you start doing anything, right? And so a lot of times what I see is with couples, again, if you don't have those goals in mind, you sort of start off with, no, I don't know, and then if you don't know, people are going to tell you. And that's what happens, Jason, whether that's the vendors or the TV or the Pinterest or your family or your friends, someone else is going to start filling in those blanks for you. And I think it's important, crucial even, that you have that conversation with your partner so that you two are on the same page and then can relay that conversation to other people. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need to be flexible. We're going to talk about flexibility a little bit too here. That doesn't mean you don't need to be flexible with what those plans are, but having a framework at least that you're going into it with and knowing the why behind what you're doing helps contextualize that conversation and helps avoid that overwhelm that might be coming with about all the shopping you're about to do.
I know that we have a future podcast episode dedicated to kind of setting limits with parents and setting limits with friends and kind of, kind of deciding on a framework as you put it. I think that's a great word for setting up boundaries and limits about how you are going to approach this wedding. But without going too much into that, I think that part of clear goals is, really approaching it with an open mind. Even though you have your clear goals, You are also to some extent, like you said before, flexible. We want our guests to have a good experience. We as the couple, or you as the couple, want to have a good experience, and you want your guests to have a good experience, right? But you also want to be, to some extent, accommodating, right? You want to provide them with comfort. And I was doing some work with a wedding organization's subdivision of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we were talking about and trying to define ways how we could be accommodating to people, right? So what do I mean by accommodating? Well, I know Martine, as a planner, often talks about how can we access it? And so I'm going to take over just for a minute, Martine, because I see this happen a lot. I see a lot of couples telling me, well, I want my grandmother in the video. I want my parents in the video. And so, the couple will choose to get married in a location that an elderly person can hardly get to. It's on a hill, on a mountain, right? And the mountain's beautiful. It's one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen in the Hudson Valley. But an 80-year-old person can't get there, right? Or if someone's in a wheelchair, they aren't able to access, and the place doesn't have a ramp, right? So they aren't able to access your venue without some type of extra special, being lifted up by all of the grandchildren or something like that, right? So I think, being open-minded, being flexible, and also being accommodating to your guests also should kind of factor into your framework when thinking about setting goals and setting limits, and as you begin to plan for your wedding.
100%. And I think that's the other thing that the reason that I kind of like people to prioritize their wish list is because if it's not super important to you, but it is super important to somebody important in your life,
right?
Don't make it a big deal, right? But knowing those things that are kind of your critical options first, but also knowing that you're going to have some room for flexibility and accommodation is also really important. And the last one that I really wanted to talk about, Jason, before we wrap this episode up, is ensuring that wherever you go for your venue, wherever you're booking your venue, because that's usually the first go-to for most folks, although I do help people find venues if they need it. The first go-to is making sure that you like both your indoor and outdoor plan. I understand that you might want to get married outside, and hopefully it will not rain on your wedding day. But what you really don't want is it for it to rain and you hate the rain, the backup rain option that you're going to get married in. So I feel like people should consider that way more than just the outside piece of where they're going. Because it might rain and then you don't want to be upset about where you were getting married or unhappy with the location if that doesn't work for you.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of situations where the outside plan is gorgeous, the inside plan is just okay, and the couple and the day is threatening, right? So it's like kind of like it looks like it wants to rain. It's in the forecast for like 40%, which is the worst percent because you don't know what that means.
Right.
Right. And the couple is pushing for that outside wedding and hoping that it holds up. And you start to feel a few drops, and the bride is like, "No, you can tell she really doesn't want to do it inside." And then we go inside, and it actually didn't rain outside, and the inside of the venue is, if the outside is a 9, the inside is a 2, and
right.
Right. So yeah, to your point, find a place that has
you love both.
Right. Maybe it's not a 9, but maybe it's a 7 and the inside is a 6, right? And
exactly.
So you can live with both. So right. And part of that, goes to seeking out your venue as early as you can, right? To get that date, to get that season, that time of year that you want, or the month that you want, and whatever.
Exactly. All right. Well, Jason, thank you so much for chatting with me here about things we want guests to know on our official first episode of A New York Wedding Jam. And I'll catch up with you on the next one.
The pleasure was mine, Martine. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.